So this is the data logging project. This is the using two sensors, displaying it on an LED, and then writing it to an SD card. So all the components we've used before. This is a potentiometer, so this is controlling the screen and the brightness of the screen. I've got a photocell sensor right here to detect the light, and then buried in here right there I've actually got a thermistor to capture and measure the temperature of the room. So first it's displaying it on the screen, and then over here I've got an SD card plugged into the SD card reader, and it's writing it to a .cvs file so that when I take that out I can plug it into a computer and it will import it into a Excel file, and I can actually scroll down and it'll take data points every so often. You'll see what the code looks like and what it's doing. So essentially I've just got everything hooked up. It's all mangled, but I've got wires that are controlling this. So I've got wires coming from the sensors back to the board, and I've got outputs from the board that are going to the LED screen. So all of these wires up here are for controlling this. So the first couple here are power. I've got one that's going to the potentiometer so that I can control the screen input, the brightness of it. And so on down the line I've got couple more in sets basically of three. One's the ground, or four, sorry, no, three. One's the ground, one's the hot, and one is the actual data coming in. So each one of these, the temperature and the light, have their own sets of wires that are coming in and telling the data to it. As well as on here I've got the data coming back to the board, and then the board is writing it actually to the SD card that you can see there. And you'll be able to see the data that it collected here in a little bit. So this is the data logger code for that. These are the libraries that I used in conjunction with the code that is on down a little bit further. So these are the code that's running behind the scenes that are controlling different things, so that it's not all bunched up here. So these right here are all of the inputs, and so the first part, the liquid crystal, the LCD screen, is being controlled by that. So the inputs or the outputs from the Arduino board to the LCD are 7, 8, 9, 4, 2, and 6. So the pins from that board are going to the screen, and that's what's controlling the screen, because the screen's only inputting stuff, it's not outputting stuff. Then the temperature pin is on analog 0, and then the light pin is on analog 1. So those are the two inputs for that. The input for the LCD colors are 3 and 5. And then we have the battery, so it's the real-time clock. That's what's controlling when it writes to the SD card, it's controlling what the time is and the date that are going to that clock, or to that data. So here is the input / output. So it's telling the Arduino chip is telling the LCD, hey, this is an input. This is what I'm going to tell you, and this is what I want you to output. So it's making that distinguish of, hey, this is what the Arduino board is collecting as far as data. So then it's going to output to the LCD screen and control the LCD screen, what color it is, the brightness, all of that stuff, given what the inputs are. So this is writing to the SD card. So it's going to immediately create a file with the time and the date, and then it's going to write it to it. So that's all happens right after another every time that you plug it in. Every time you plug it in or you turn it on, it's going to create a new file and go from there. This is a failsafe essentially, so if there's no SD card present, nothing happens. It can't display anything because it can't write it. So it's confused of, hey, I have this data, I want to display it and write it at the same time, but I can't write it because there's nowhere to write it to. So this is writing to the SD card, that line right there. So it's going to initiate a file, which is going to be a .cvx file, so that later when I pull that out, I can put it into my computer and it will pull up Excel and actually display it in a nice format so you can read it. This is the file name. This is what it's going to name the file. And given when you unplug it, it'll stop recording, and then when you plug it back in, it'll start again, but it'll start it in a new file. So this is the code to basically, it knows that it started one already, it's going to change the number. So the 00 right here is going to change from 00 to, let's say, 1. If you unplug it, if you plug it in once, it'll say 00. You unplug it and plug it back in, it'll change the number, change the save file and the name of it to vary the file name, so it can save it over and over and over again and start saving multiple files. So it changes the name essentially, so you can keep, instead of erasing the data you already have, you start new data, name it something new. This then tells it to write to the SD card and keep looping. So this down here is what it's going to write to the SD card. So the first part here is logging to. So it's logging to an SD card. So it's going to write that on the in the file, and then the file name. This is then going to be after it. So each comma that you see right here is going over one's column. So each comma tells it, hey, skip this column, go to the next one. So I have three commas, so it'll go over the 3 columns and then write Michael, and then go to the next column and write Tim. So those would be in 2 different columns in the same row. And then again down below, below that it'll say data logging file, and then down below that it'll have a row of date, go to the next one, temp in Fahrenheit, go to the next one, and then write light. So that's how it's writing all of the data into, or I mean not the data, the headers, so that you know what the data is. Down here, it's taking voltage readings for the temperature and converting them automatically to a usable number. So on the screen, you didn't see the impedance or the millivolts. You saw an actual temperature. So this is taking the first part anyways up here is taking the actual reading, converting it into a temperature, and then the bottom here is doing the same thing with the light level right here. It's then converting that into what the LCD should display. So the part that wasn't working for me is the last 2 lines here of the light. If the light level was a greater value than the temperature, the screen was supposed to be one color, and if the light temperature was less, so the temperature was greater, then it was supposed to be a different color. For some reason that didn't work in my code, and I don't know what's wrong with it. It's something to do with right here, or the way I had it hooked up. This is all of the data and how it's going to be written to the data log, or to the SD card. So this is essentially looping, and it's telling it what time it is, what day it was, what year it was, and then what the actual reading was. So it's going to take one reading and then the next, and they're going to put them in the same row and keep going from there on out. and it's going to do that. This is writing it to the data logger, or to the SD card, and this is displaying it on the LCD screen. So once it's basically, it's doing this simultaneously essentially, but one code is writing it to the SD card, the other code is telling, hey, this is what I want you to save on the LCD screen. So it's essentially taking the intensity of the readings and then displaying them, and then down here it's displaying the temperature and the light. So on the right hand side of that, it actually said temp and light in the same row. So the top row was the temperature with the reading, and then temp, and then the bottom was the actual or the light level, and then light. So it was in the same row, different columns. And it's just doing this over and over and over again. So right here, as we've seen in the past, we have a delay of 500 seconds, or 500 milliseconds. So each half a second, it's taking another reading. So when you see the data, there's going to be a lot of data for however long it ran. That's basically the essentials of the data logging code, and that's essentially what it's doing to then collect data, display the data, and record the data. So this is the data file from the data logger. This is what it saves it as. It saves it as a .csv, comma separated values. So as you recall in the code where I showed you what the headers were, and you saw my name, the second line was data log file, the third one was the date, temp, and light, and then after that it collected the data and put the date and the time in the first column, the temp in the second column, and of course the light in the last column, or the third column. So as you can tell all the way down, all the values are constantly changing, but then also the time changes as well. So as you can see, it ran for a couple seconds. Well, actually a couple minutes, because that's hours and that's minutes. So it ran for a little while. So you can see the data and how it organizes it after it ran for a little while.